Picture this. You're walking through a forest, but something feels wrong. The air is so thick with oxygen that your head starts spinning after just a few breaths. A single spark from lightning ignites the entire woodland around you, even though everything is soaking wet. Above your head, shadows pass by that shouldn't exist. Dragonflies with wingspans wider than dinner plates. Scorpions the size of house cats stalking through the undergrowth. Millipedes stretching longer than park benches crawling across the forest floor. This isn't science fiction. This actually happened. For 60 million years, our planet existed in a state so alien, so fundamentally different from today, that if you were transported there right now, you'd struggle to survive. Welcome to Earth, when the atmosphere contained 35% oxygen, almost double what we breathe today. Now, before we dive deep into this incredible chapter of our planet's past, I'm curious about something. Where are you right now as you're listening to this? Are you in bed trying to drift off to sleep? Maybe you're in a cozy chair somewhere, letting these stories wash over you. Drop a comment and let me know your city and what time it is where you are. It's fascinating to think about all the different places and times where people discover these ancient mysteries. But here's what makes this story truly remarkable. We're not just talking about bigger bugs. We're talking about a complete transformation of what life could be on Earth. An atmospheric accident that created conditions so extreme, so perfectly suited for certain creatures, that they grew to sizes that seem impossible by today's standards. And the most incredible part? These conditions will never, ever exist again. The secret lies in something most of us never think about: the air we breathe. Right now, you're inhaling roughly 21% oxygen mixed with nitrogen and trace gases. It's been this way for your entire life, for human civilization, for millions of years. But 300 million years ago, that ratio was completely different. Plants had discovered something revolutionary, and they were pumping out oxygen at rates our planet had never seen before. To understand how we got to this hypercharged world, we need to step back and imagine Earth as it was then. The continents weren't scattered across the globe like they are today. Instead, they were slowly colliding, forming one massive supercontinent that stretched from the North Pole to the South Pole. Picture a single enormous landmass surrounded by one global ocean. The climate was humid, tropical, and absolutely perfect for plant growth. But these weren't the plants you'd recognize. There were no flowers blooming in meadows, no fruit hanging from trees, no grass covering the ground. The world was still hundreds of millions of years away from roses, apple orchards, or wheat fields. Instead, towering above everything else were giant club mosses called lycopods. These weren't your garden variety mosses. They grew to heights of 100 feet. That's a 10-story building made of moss. Think about that for a moment. Imagine walking through a forest where the trees aren't really trees at all, but massive mosses with hollow, water-filled stems. They reproduced using spores, not seeds, creating an entirely different kind of ecosystem than anything we see today. Alongside these moss giants stood seed ferns that reached incredible heights. and fungi that grew as tall as modern oak trees. These forests were unlike anything that exists in our world. They were dense, dark, and perpetually damp. Vines choked every available space. The forest floor was a spongy carpet of decaying plant matter that never fully rotted away. Instead, it piled up year after year, creating massive peat bogs that would eventually compress into the coal seams we mine today. Yes, when you see coal being burned for electricity, you're witnessing the remains of these ancient forests being released back into the atmosphere. But here's where things get interesting. All of these plants were photosynthesis machines working overtime. They were pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and pumping out oxygen at unprecedented rates. For millions of years, this created a one-way flow. Carbon went into plant tissue, then got buried in swamps before it could decompose. Oxygen stayed in the air, building up to levels that would be toxic to us today. Scientists estimate that atmospheric oxygen reached 35% during this period. To put that in perspective, if you were somehow transported back to this time, you'd feel lightheaded and dizzy within minutes. Your chest would rise and fall faster than normal, not from panic, but from the sheer chemical intensity of the air. At these oxygen levels, even damp wood could catch fire and burn uncontrollably. Forest fires would have been spectacular, unstoppable events that could incinerate entire regions. But for one particular group of animals, this oxygen-rich world was paradise. Arthropods, insects, spiders, millipedes, scorpions, and their relatives found themselves in an environment perfectly suited for growth. And grow they did, to sizes that would terrify anyone who encountered them today. The key to understanding why insects could become so massive lies in how they breathe. Unlike mammals, birds, or reptiles, insects don't have lungs. They don't take deep breaths or pump air through their bodies. Instead, they rely on a network of tiny tubes called trachea that branch throughout their entire body like microscopic highways. Oxygen enters through small openings called spiracles and simply drifts to where it's needed through passive diffusion. This system works beautifully for small creatures. It's actually incredibly efficient. But there's a major limitation. Diffusion only works well over short distances. The bigger an insect grows, the harder it becomes to get oxygen to the center of its body. In today's atmosphere, this creates a natural size limit. The largest insects we have now, like the giant weta crickets of New Zealand, are about as big as insects can get, with 21% oxygen. But when atmospheric oxygen nearly doubled, that size limit was lifted. Suddenly, passive diffusion could work over much greater distances. Insects had room to grow, and they took full advantage of it. Atmospheric oxygen acted like a performance-enhancing drug for the entire arthropod world. This isn't just theoretical speculation. Scientists have actually tested this in laboratories. In 2007, researchers at Arizona State University raised modern insects in chambers with different oxygen concentrations. The results were striking. When they increased oxygen levels to match ancient conditions, dragonflies and beetles grew significantly larger than their normal size. The genetic potential for gigantism still exists in modern insects. They just can't express it in today's atmosphere. Now, let's take a journey back to this alien world and meet some of its most incredible inhabitants. Close your eyes and imagine standing in one of these ancient forests. Your boots sink slightly into the spongy peat beneath your feet. The air around you shimmers with humidity and that dangerously high oxygen content. Everywhere you look, there's movement. Strange creatures with too many legs scuttling between the ferns. But when you look up, that's when you see something that makes your brain struggle to process what you're witnessing. Gliding through the filtered light of the forest canopy is a creature that looks like a bird, if birds had never been invented and evolution had tried something completely different. This is Palearctoptera, one of the first animals in Earth's history to master flight. With wingspans ranging from 15 to 22 inches, these were massive insects by any standard. But despite their intimidating size, they weren't predators. They were gentle herbivores, sipping plant sap with primitive needle-like mouthparts. Their wings were works of art. 4 main wings covered in intricate vein patterns that looked like stained glass windows. But here's something truly bizarre. They also had small wing-like lobes near the front of their bodies, giving them 6 wing-like extensions in total. Scientists think these may have been stabilizers or evolutionary remnants from some aquatic ancestor. What made Palearctoptera so significant wasn't just their size. They represented something revolutionary. For the first time in Earth's history, an animal wasn't limited to crawling on the ground or swimming in water. They had conquered the air itself. They opened up an entirely new realm for life to explore, but not all of the aerial giants were peaceful plant sippers. Some were hunters, and they were about to change the rules of the game forever. Picture wings that beat like sails in the wind, eyes the size of marbles, providing nearly 360-degree vision, legs equipped with barbed hooks that could snatch prey right out of the air. This was Meganeura, and for millions of years it ruled the skies of the ancient world. With wingspans reaching 28 inches and body lengths of 13 inches, Meganeura was a giant by any measure. Modern birds would struggle to match its impressive silhouette. But size wasn't its only advantage. This was a precision killing machine. Its 4 wings worked independently, allowing it to hover, dive, and accelerate with surgical accuracy. Its enormous compound eyes gave it vision that would make modern fighter pilots jealous. And its hunting success rate? Scientists estimate it was above 90%. This wasn't some clumsy prehistoric experiment. Meganeura flew like it was born for it, which in a sense it was. The dense, oxygen-rich atmosphere provided more lift for its wings, making flight easier and less energy-intensive than it would be today. Its prey wasn't limited to tiny gnats or mosquitoes. Fossil evidence suggests Meganeura hunted other large insects, young amphibians, and possibly even small vertebrates. Its legs formed a spiny basket that could crush victims in midair. No ground pursuit necessary. Just strike, crush, and consume. But while these aerial predators dominated the skies, the forest floor had its own terrors. And they were even more alien than anything flying overhead. Something massive is moving through the underbrush. At first glance, you might think it's a fallen log being dragged across the forest floor. But then it bends. It curves around the base of a giant club moss, revealing segmented armor plates that gleam like polished obsidian. You've just encountered one of the most nightmarish creations of this oxygen-rich world, a predator that would make even the most imaginative horror writer pause before putting it on paper. Meet Pulmonoscorpius kirktonensis, the largest scorpion that ever walked our planet. This armored nightmare stretched nearly 28 inches from claw to stinger. That's roughly the size of a modern house cat, but with an entirely different kind of energy. Where cats are warm and soft, this ancient hunter was cold, calculating, and covered in thick, chitinous plates that interlocked like medieval armor. Every movement was deliberate. Every step was calculated. This wasn't a creature in any hurry because it didn't need to be. Pulmonoscorpius sat at the absolute top of its food chain, an apex predator that had perfected the art of ambush hunting in ways that seem almost over-engineered for its time. Let's start with those front appendages, the pedipalps. Think of them as arms ending in massive pincers, but arms that could crush the exoskeletons of other arthropods like we might crack a walnut. Fossil analysis shows these pincers had serrated inner edges, perfect for gripping slippery, soft-bodied prey that might try to escape. And then there's the tail, arching high above its body like a question mark made of armor, ending in a curved stinger that was almost certainly loaded with venom. While we don't have direct fossil evidence of venom, scorpions giblins, modern U.S. a clear blueprint, and there's no reason to think this ancient giant was any less equipped. Its sheer size would have allowed for significant venom volume, making even a single sting potentially lethal to creatures much larger than typical scorpion prey. But Pulmonoscorpius had other advantages beyond brute force and chemical warfare. Its sensory system was remarkable. Like modern arachnids, it likely had sensory hairs covering its body that could detect the slightest air movements. Even the soft footsteps of a juvenile amphibian could give away its position from a considerable distance. This made it the perfect ambush predator. It didn't need to chase anything. Instead, it would position itself in the dark spaces beneath fallen lycopod trunks, or hunker down under blankets of fern litter where its armored body blended seamlessly with the shadows. Then it would wait, and when something edible finally wandered within range, strike, inject, wait for the venom to do its work. Its diet was probably diverse. Smaller arthropods, mollusks, early amphibians, even the first primitive reptiles, if they were unlucky enough to cross its path. Fossil evidence places these giants in wet environments full of decaying vegetation and dense undergrowth. Perfect hunting grounds for something that specialized in staying hidden until the last possible moment. But despite its terrifying appearance and impressive hunting abilities, Pulmonoscorpius represents something that could only exist once in Earth's history. Modern scorpions rarely grow beyond 8 inches, and even the largest living species are a fraction of the size of their ancient ancestors. For a brief moment in geological time, these armored hunters were unchallenged ruler to the forest floor, yet even Pulmonoscorpius wasn't the largest arthropod walking through these ancient forests. That distinction belongs to something so massive it defies belief. Something that, at first glance, you might mistake for a fallen tree trunk being dragged across the landscape, until you realize it's moving under its own power, bending and curving as it navigates around obstacles. This is Arthropleura, and it holds the record as the largest land invertebrate that has ever lived. We know about its incredible size not just from fossils, but from the trackways it left behind. Massive, undulating impressions preserved in ancient sediment that are so wide and deep you could literally lie down inside them. Arthropleura measured up to 8.5 feet in length and weighed as much as a large dog, possibly more. It looked superficially like a millipede, but calling it a millipede would be like calling a whale a fish. Technically accurate in the broadest sense, but missing the point entirely. This was a millipede tank hybrid covered in hard, segmented armor, its dorsal plates locked together like overlapping roof tiles, providing protection from above, while dozens of leg pairs gave it traction through mud, root networks, and decomposing plant matter. The engineering of its exoskeleton was remarkable. Each segment was perfectly fitted to the next, creating a flexible yet nearly impenetrable shell. But here's what might surprise you. Despite its terrifying size and armored appearance, Arthropleura appears to have been a herbivore, a gentle giant that fed on decaying vegetation, mosses, and fungal matter. Its jaw structure lacks the piercing or slicing features you'd expect from a predator. Instead, it was equipped for grinding up soft plant tissues, slowly converting the forest floor into mulch. Yet in this world, being massive was a form of protection in itself. Size meant safety. Even apex predators like Pulmonoscorpius would have thought twice before attacking something with nearly impenetrable armor and the mass to back it up. No known vertebrate from that era could challenge Arthropleura in a direct confrontation. Fossil evidence suggests these giants were common in wetland forests, especially in areas prone to periodic flooding where decaying plant matter accumulated quickly. They were the cleanup crew of the ancient world, processing dead vegetation and returning nutrients to the ecosystem. But for all their impressive size, there's still so much we don't know about them. We've never found a complete head fossil, so the exact structure of their mouth parts remains a mystery. We can only speculate about their reproductive biology. Did they guard their eggs? Did they burrow? The answers are lost to time. The Carboniferous period was truly a time of evolutionary experimentation. Creatures were testing the absolute limits of what was physically possible in this hyperoxic world. Take Megarachne, for example. For decades, paleontologists thought this was the largest spider that ever lived. Textbooks described it as an 8-legged terror with a leg span that could cover a dinner plate. Until 2005, when researchers took another look at the original fossil. What they discovered completely changed the story. Megarachne wasn't actually a spider at all. It wasn't even an arachnid. It belonged to an entirely different family called Eurypterids, more commonly known as sea scorpions. This revelation was both disappointing and fascinating. Disappointing because it meant we'd lost our record-holding giant spider. Fascinating because it showed just how alien these ancient ecosystems really were. Megarachne didn't weave webs or creep through forest undergrowth. Instead, it crawled along the bottoms of shallow rivers, using paddle-like limbs to sweep through sediment in search of food. It belonged to the same broad evolutionary family as modern scorpions and horseshoe crabs. These were aquatic hunters and bottom feeders that thrived in the shallow waters before fish and amphibians came to dominate aquatic ecosystems. Even though it wasn't a spider, Megarachne was still impressive. Fossil estimates suggest a body length of about 21 inches, making it one of the largest known eurypterids from freshwater environments. Its feeding method was probably sweep feeding, using specialized appendages to rake through silt and trap small prey like worms, insect larvae, and crustaceans. Its thick carapace, preserved in beautiful detail in the fossil record, resembled the segmented body of a terrestrial spider, which is what originally confused researchers. But its structure was fundamentally different from true spiders. No spinnerets for making silk, no fangs for injecting venom, no clear adaptations for air-breathing life. It lived in water, shallow, swampy, oxygen-rich water, where decaying vegetation fed entire ecosystems of bottom dwellers and filter feeders. And Megarachne wasn't alone in this aquatic realm. Its lineage included true giants, marine eurypterids that reached 8 feet or more. Megarachne was smaller, but unique. One of the few eurypterids adapted to freshwater environments, bridging the critical evolutionary transition from oceanic to terrestrial ecosystems. When you look at reconstructions of its armored body and flattened limbs, you see something genuinely alien, something so fundamentally different from modern animals that it triggers an instinctive unease, a reaction to something that breaks all our rules about what an animal should look like. But not all the predators of this ancient world needed massive size to be effective. Some succeeded by being first, by pioneering entirely new ways of life that wouldn't be perfected for millions of years. Trigonotarbids were among the first true terrestrial predators, land-based, air-breathing, and completely at home in the undergrowth of these ancient forests. Some fossils date them back at least 419 million years, well before the Carboniferous period even began. They were true pioneers, among the very first creatures to abandon the relative safety of aquatic environments and claim the land as their hunting ground. For decades, scientists classified them as spiders. They certainly looked like spiders, with 8 legs and predatory lifestyles. But trigonotarbids were something different. They were arachnids, yes, silk glands, but not true spiders. They couldn't weave webs. Instead, their bodies were low, heavily armored, with shell-like carapaces protecting their heads and thoraxes. Their hunting strategy was direct and brutal. Their prey consisted of small, soft-bodied invertebrates that they would capture with their spined, nimble legs. Once caught, prey was held in place while powerful jaws crushed and tore. No webs needed, no venom required, just raw predatory efficiency. Some trigonotarbids were tiny, just a few millimeters long. The largest reached about 2 inches. Their small size was actually their greatest strength. In a world dominated by enormous predators, they could hunt unnoticed in the spaces between. They occupied ecological niches that larger hunters couldn't access. They breathed through book lungs, just like modern scorpions and spiders. Their internal anatomy shows adaptations that were remarkably advanced for their time. Fossils from sites in Scotland preserve trigonotarbids in stunning detail, down to their respiratory organs and even the tiny hairs on their legs. For tens of millions of years, these small predators thrived in their terrestrial niches. Then gradually, they began to disappear, not through any catastrophic extinction event, but through evolutionary obsolescence. They were simply outcompeted by more specialized arachnids who evolved something trigonotarbids never developed: silk. The ability to produce silk opened up entirely new hunting strategies. Web-building spiders could capture prey without actively hunting. They could create traps, build shelters, wrap their eggs in protective cocoons. Trigonotarbids, for all their pioneering spirit, couldn't compete with these innovations. But while trigonotarbids quietly faded into evolutionary history, other creatures were developing different solutions to survival in this dangerous world. Solutions that didn't rely on speed, stealth, or silk, but on something much more straightforward: pure, impenetrable defense. This brings us to one of the most remarkable creatures of the ancient world. Something so small you could hold it in the palm of your hand, yet so perfectly armored it might have been the most of Earth's history. Meet Lep, heavily defended animal in its size class in Allidocoleus, better known by its unofficial nickname, the Excalibur worm. Despite being only a few millimeters long, this tiny marine creature had developed armor so advanced it seemed almost impossibly sophisticated for such an ancient time. We're talking about an animal that lived over 400 million years ago. Tens of millions of years before those giant carboniferous forests even existed. Its fossils were first discovered in what is now Western Australia, in shallow reef environments that once bordered ancient seas. What made Lepidocoleus so extraordinary was its full-body exoskeleton made of overlapping mineralized plates. These weren't just any plates. They were composed of crystalline calcite, creating a structure more like medieval chain mail than anything you'd expect from a soft-bodied worm. The plates interlocked in perfect formation, creating armor that was both flexible and nearly impenetrable. They looked like miniature scales or overlapping shields. When threatened, the worm could curl into a tight ball, presenting only the outer armor plates to potential predators. Nothing in its size class stood a chance of breaking through that crystalline fortress. The sophistication of this armor system inspired its nickname. Like the legendary sword Excalibur, it seemed too perfect, too finely crafted, too advanced for such an ancient creature. Here was an animal that had solved the problem of defense so completely that it became virtually invulnerable to attack. But evolutionary perfection always comes with trade-offs. That incredible armor came at the cost of mobility. The weight and bulk of all those plates slowed Lepidocoleus down, limited its range of movement, and probably made it harder to disperse to new habitats. It could defend itself perfectly, but it couldn't compete in other ways. We don't know exactly what it ate. Probably organic waste, microbial mats, or tiny particles of detritus it could filter from the seafloor. It wasn't leaving bite marks or hunting actively. What it left behind was something far more impressive: a fossilized masterpiece of evolutionary engineering that shows us just how creative life can be when solving survival challenges. And then, like so many evolutionary experiments, it quietly vanished. As predators became more sophisticated and vertebrates began to rise, survival through defense alone wasn't enough anymore. For a brief moment in deep time, this tiny creature had achieved something close to invulnerability. Then the world moved on, and its perfect armor became a footnote in the fossil record. But the real secret to understanding all these bizarre creatures, from giant scorpions to armored worms, lies in something we take completely for granted: the way they obtained the most basic necessity of life, oxygen. Every breath you're taking right now involves an incredibly sophisticated system. Your lungs expand and contract, drawing air into millions of tiny sacs called alveoli. Your blood carries oxygen throughout your body using specialized molecules called hemoglobin. Your heart pumps this oxygen-rich blood to every cell that needs it. It's an active, complex, energy-intensive process that allows large animals like us to exist. Arthropods do things completely differently. They rely on passive diffusion through a network of branching tubes that delivers oxygen directly to their tissues. No active pumping, no oxygen-carrying blood proteins. Just simple physics. Oxygen moves from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. For small creatures, this system is elegant and efficient. Oxygen goes straight to the cells that need it without any intermediate steps. This is why insects can achieve such incredibly high metabolic rates for their size. A hummingbird's wings beat about 80 times per second, which seems impossibly fast. But some small insects can beat their wings over 1,000 times per second. The limitation comes with size. Diffusion only works effectively over short distances. The bigger an arthropod grows, the longer those oxygen delivery tubes become, and the harder it is to get oxygen to the center of the body. In our current atmosphere, with 21% oxygen, this creates a hard ceiling on how large insects can grow. But in the Carboniferous, with 35% oxygen, that ceiling was lifted dramatically. Suddenly, passive diffusion could work over much greater distances. The same physical principles that limit insect size today allowed them to grow enormous in that oxygen-rich past. And it wasn't just about breathing. These ancient arthropods also had incredible strength advantages that we rarely think about. If you had to organize a pound-for-pound strength competition between different types of animals, insects would dominate every category. Consider the dung beetle. This small insect can pull over 1,000 times its own body weight. If a human being had that same strength ratio, we'd be able to pull 6 full-sized buses simultaneously. The rhinoceros beetle can lift 850 times its body weight. Leafcutter ants regularly carry objects 50 to 100 times heavier than they are. Even mighty silverback gorillas, with all their impressive muscle mass, can only manage about 10 times their body weight. The mechanical advantages of exoskeleton construction and insect muscle arrangement allow arthropods to exert tremendous force relative to their size. Now, imagine these same mechanical advantages scaled up to the size of a dog or larger during the Carboniferous period. The strength of these ancient arthropods would have been absolutely phenomenal. They weren't just big, they were big and incredibly powerful. But this age of giants was approaching its end, and the cause wasn't what you might expect from dramatic extinction stories. no asteroid impact, no volcanic catastrophe, no sudden environmental collapse that wiped the slate clean in a single geological moment. Instead, the end came gradually, like a slow exhalation that lasted millions of years. By the end of the Carboniferous period, around 300 million years ago, the great swamplands that had dominated Earth's tropical regions began to change. The vast, humid jungles that had been perfect for oxygen-producing plants. And the giants they supported started to fragment and dry out. The reason was tectonic. The same forces that had been slowly assembling all of Earth's land masses into one enormous supercontinent were changing global climate patterns. As continents collided and mountain ranges rose, they altered air circulation and rainfall distribution. The warm, moist habitats that had sustained the oxygen-pumping forests began to disappear. Swamplands shrank. Peat bogs dried up. The massive carbon sink that had been pumping Earth's atmosphere full of oxygen for tens of millions of years was shutting down. And as it did, oxygen levels began their slow, irreversible decline. From the peak of 35%, atmospheric oxygen started dropping toward more moderate levels. By the early Permian period, oxygen concentrations had fallen to around 25%, still higher than today's levels, but not enough to sustain the physiology of giants. Large insects could no longer get sufficient oxygen to support their massive bodies. The atmospheric steroid that had enabled their gigantic size was being withdrawn, and they couldn't adapt fast enough to survive the change. But oxygen decline wasn't the only problem these creatures faced. The collapse of the rainforest ecosystems triggered what scientists now call the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, a widespread ecological disruption that occurred around 305 million years ago. As habitats dried and became fragmented, many amphibians and large arthropods lost their ecological niches. Fire became more frequent in the drier climate. Most importantly, fungi that were better adapted to decomposition in cooler, oxygen-poor environments began to outcompete plants in breaking down deadwood. This meant less carbon was being trapped in soil and more was returning to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. The biosphere was rebalancing itself, but not in favor of the giants. The very success of the oxygen-producing forests had created the conditions for their own downfall. And as the old ecosystem collapsed, new players were waiting in the wings. Early reptiles, with their revolutionary amniotic eggs and watertight scaly skin, didn't need the swampy conditions that amphibians required. They could move inland, lay their eggs on dry ground, and survive in the new, more arid world that was emerging. These early reptiles weren't dominant yet. They were still small, still experimental, but they had crucial advantages. They could breathe efficiently even as oxygen levels dropped. They could reproduce without standing water. Most importantly, they were adaptable in ways that the giant arthropods simply weren't. By the time the Permian period began, around 299 million years ago, the age of giant arthropods was effectively over. Some of their lineages survived, but in smaller, more conservative forms. The window of opportunity that had allowed insects and their relatives to grow to enormous sizes had closed forever. It's tempting to imagine alternative scenarios. What if evolution had taken a different path? Could insects have developed more efficient respiratory systems that would have allowed them to maintain their size even as oxygen levels fell? Could we be living in a world today populated by dragonflies the size of eagles and beetles as large as automobiles? Probably not. Once vertebrates developed their sophisticated lungs and circulatory systems, they gained advantages that arthropods couldn't match. The vertebrate body plan allowed for greater mobility, more behavioral complexity, and most importantly, better scalability. Size mattered, and vertebrates were simply better at being large. When birds eventually took to the skies and mammals emerged from their small niches, the competitive pressure intensified dramatically. New predators meant new hunting strategies. New prey animals meant new defensive adaptations. The evolutionary arms race accelerated in ways that favored active, intelligent, adaptable creatures over passive giants. Insects didn't disappear, of course. They adapted, diversified, and found new ways to succeed. But they could never again dominate terrestrial ecosystems the way they had during those extraordinary 60 million years of hyperoxic conditions. Still, echoes of that ancient empire remain all around us. Watch a modern dragonfly hover over a pond, and you're seeing flight mechanics that haven't fundamentally changed in 300 million years. Observe the segmented armor of a millipede curled in your garden, and you're looking at a body plan perfected by giants. Notice the patient hunting behavior of a praying mantis, and you're witnessing predatory strategies that were already ancient when the first dinosaurs appeared. These modern insects are smaller, less imposing, but no less remarkable than their giant ancestors. They represent one of evolution's greatest success stories, not because they remained unchanged, but because they adapted so successfully to changing conditions. The genetic potential for gigantism still lurks in their DNA, waiting for conditions that will never return. They carry within them the biological memory of a time when the air itself was different, when breathing was easier, when growing large was not just possible, but inevitable. And that brings us to one of the most fascinating questions about this ancient world. Could conditions like these ever return? Could Earth's atmosphere ever again reach 35% oxygen and bring back the age of giants? The answer reveals one of the most important evolutionary arms races in our planet's history, a molecular battle that fundamentally changed the chemistry of our atmosphere and ensures that the Carboniferous oxygen peak was a one-time event that can never be repeated. The story centers around a substance that most people never think about, but which revolutionized life on Earth, and then, millions of years later, prevented the return of the conditions that had created it in the first place. That substance was lignin, and understanding lignin is the key to understanding why we'll never again see a world of giant insects. Imagine you're a plant 400 million years ago. You've just figured out how to live on land, but you're facing a serious problem. How do you stand upright? How do you compete with other plants for sunlight when you're all basically lying flat on the ground? The solution that early plants discovered was lignin, a complex polymer that gave them structural support. Lignin is what puts the wood in woody plants. It's the molecular scaffolding that allows trees to grow tall, that gives branches their strength, that creates the rigid framework we see in every forest today. When plants first evolved lignin, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, they could grow upward instead of just outward. They could tower over their competitors and capture more sunlight. But lignin had an unexpected property that would change Earth's entire atmospheric chemistry. It was incredibly difficult to break down. When those early lignin-producing plants died, nothing on Earth could efficiently decompose their tough, woody tissues. Instead of rotting completely, much of their carbon-rich material became buried in swampy conditions, where it was preserved rather than returned to the atmosphere. This created something unprecedented in Earth's history, a one-way flow of carbon. Plants were pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis, converting it into lignin-rich tissues, and then taking that carbon out of circulation when they died. For every carbon atom that got locked away underground, a molecule of oxygen remained free in the atmosphere. This process continued for millions of years. More carbon buried meant more oxygen released. The atmospheric balance shifted dramatically as oxygen levels climbed higher and higher. Plants had accidentally created the conditions that would enable the age of giants. But evolution doesn't stand still. And around the end of the Carboniferous period, something happened that would forever change this equation. A certain group of fungi evolved the ability to efficiently break down lignin. These white rot fungi developed sophisticated enzymatic tools that could dismantle the tough polymer that had been protecting plant matter from decay. Suddenly, the one-way carbon street became a two-way exchange. Dead plants could now be fully decomposed. Their stored carbon was released back to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, preventing the continued buildup of oxygen. This fungal innovation was so effective that it fundamentally rewired Earth's carbon cycle. The same early versions of these lignin-degrading fungi can be found preserved in amber from the late Carboniferous, right around the time when oxygen levels began their irreversible decline. It's a perfect example of how life creates its own constraints. Plants evolved lignin to gain an advantage, which accidentally created hyperoxic conditions, which enabled giant arthropods, which eventually led to the evolution of organisms that could break down lignin, which ended the hyperoxic conditions and the age of giants. Today, every forest floor on Earth is teeming with lignin-degrading organisms. Every fallen log hosts communities of decomposers that can break it down completely. Modern trees still produce lignin, but now it's part of a balanced carbon cycle rather than a one-way ticket to burial. The evolution of lignin-degrading fungi is why we'll never see 35% oxygen again. But fungi weren't the only organisms that changed the rules of the game. Around 150 million years ago, termites evolved with their own specialized wood decomposing capabilities. These insects, with their complex gut microbiomes, became incredibly effective at breaking down cellulose and other plant materials. Today, termites process roughly a third of all dead wood in tropical environments. These decomposers, fungi, bacteria, termites, and others, now form a continuous cleanup crew that prevents the massive carbon burial that once drove oxygen levels so high It's not just about the absence of swampy forests. It's about the presence of organisms that couldn't exist until evolution solved the lignin puzzle. This evolutionary arms race between the plants developing tough lignin and decomposers learning to break it down represents a shift as significant as any in Earth's history. It fundamentally changed our planet's atmospheric chemistry in the opposite direction from the great oxygenation event that had occurred billions of years earlier, not eliminating oxygen, but preventing it from reaching extreme levels again. The Carboniferous oxygen peak wasn't just an unusual chapter in Earth's story. It was a unique event, a window of opportunity created by a temporary imbalance that life itself eventually corrected. And this reveals something profound about our atmosphere. It isn't just a physical feature of the planet. It's a biological creation, shaped by the metabolic activities of countless organisms over vast spans of time. The air you're breathing right now is, in a very real sense, a product of life itself. Every molecule of oxygen was produced by photosynthesis. The precise mixture of gases that surrounds our planet has been fine-tuned by billions of years of biological activity, chemical reactions, and geological processes. It's a living atmosphere, constantly maintained by the collective metabolism of the biosphere. But the Carboniferous wasn't the only time oxygen levels changed dramatically. To truly understand the story of our atmosphere, we need to zoom out and see the full sweep of oxygen's history on Earth, because it tells an incredible tale of revolution, catastrophe, and the gradual rise of complexity. For Earth's first 2 billion years, there was virtually no free oxygen in the atmosphere, less than 1/1000%. Early life forms were anaerobes, using sulfur, iron, and other chemicals in their metabolism instead of oxygen. Our planet's atmosphere was dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and methane, more like modern Venus or Mars than the Earth we know. Then, around 2.4 billion years ago, something revolutionary happened. Simple, single-celled organisms called cyanobacteria perfected photosynthesis. They learned to use sunlight to split water molecules, producing energy and releasing oxygen as waste. From their perspective, it was just a useful metabolic trick. From the planet's perspective, it was transformation on an unimaginable scale. At first, the change was slow. Much of the oxygen initially reacted with dissolved iron in ancient oceans, creating massive rust deposits that we still mine today. But eventually, the oxygen overwhelmed these chemical sinks and began accumulating in the atmosphere. This was Earth's first atmospheric revolution, and it came with a price. Oxygen levels rose from nearly 0 to perhaps 1 or 2% of the atmosphere. For anaerobic organisms that had dominated Earth for billions of years, this was catastrophic. Oxygen was toxic to them. Many went extinct, while others retreated to oxygen-free environments, where some of their descendants still survive today. For the next 1.5 billion years, oxygen levels remained relatively low, fluctuating between 1 and 10%. Then, around 800 million years ago, another increase began. The Neoproterozoic oxygenation event pushed levels up to perhaps 15%. This may have helped trigger the evolution of the first complex animals, setting the stage for the explosion of life forms that would follow. from about 550 to 400 million years ago. Oxygen gradually increased to around 20% as the first land plants evolved and spread. Then came the dramatic rise during the Carboniferous that we've been exploring, reaching that unprecedented peak of 30 to 35% around 300 million years ago. Since then, oxygen has experienced several oscillations, but never again reached such heights. There was a significant drop during the Permian and Triassic periods, falling to perhaps 15%. This was followed by a rise during the Cretaceous period to around 25 to 30%. For the past 60 million years, levels have gradually declined to our current 21%. What's remarkable about this history is how closely it aligns with the evolution of complex life. Each major increase in atmospheric oxygen corresponds with the emergence of more sophisticated, energy-demanding organisms. The Great Oxygenation Event prepared Earth for the first complex cells. The Neoproterozoic increase preceded the Cambrian explosion of animal diversity. The Carboniferous peak enabled the first large land animals. Oxygen isn't just background scenery for life. It's been a driver of evolutionary innovation, repeatedly enabling new forms of complexity. Higher oxygen levels allow for higher metabolic rates, which support more elaborate body plans and behaviors. Lower oxygen levels create selective pressures that favor efficiency and specialization. Today's atmosphere, with its 21% oxygen, represents a long-term equilibrium between oxygen-producing processes like photosynthesis and oxygen-consuming processes like respiration, decomposition, and chemical weathering. It's high enough to support complex life like us, but low enough to prevent the runaway fires that would have been common in the Carboniferous. Interestingly, human activities are causing a very slight decrease in atmospheric oxygen, about 0.001% per year as we burn fossil fuels. This rate is far too small to affect human health directly, but it represents yet another chapter in the long relationship between life and its gaseous environment. The story of Earth's oxygen teaches us that our planet is not static. It has undergone radical transformations, sometimes driven by the simplest life forms. The air we breathe today is the product of billions of years of biological activity, and it continues to be shaped by the collective metabolism of all living things. This brings us back to the Carboniferous and its lessons about atmospheric change. When oxygen levels shifted dramatically at the end of that period, it didn't just affect insects. It drove massive evolutionary changes across multiple groups of organisms. Amphibians that had grown large in the oxygen-rich environment found themselves struggling as levels fell. Early reptiles, with their more efficient respiratory systems, gained competitive advantages. The transition from high to low oxygen marked one of the most significant turning points in Earth's history. It ended the age of giant arthropods and began the age of reptiles. The descendants of those early reptiles would eventually include dinosaurs, pterosaurs, birds, and mammals. In a very real sense, we owe our existence to the falling oxygen levels that ended the reign of the giant insects. Scientists have confirmed this connection between oxygen and animal size through elegant experiments. In 2010, researchers raised fruit flies in atmospheres with different oxygen concentrations over multiple generations. Higher oxygen consistently led to larger body sizes, while lower oxygen produced smaller flies. Similar experiments with dragonflies showed that modern species raised in 35% oxygen developed larger wing-to-body ratios and grew well beyond their normal size ranges. These studies prove that the genetic potential for gigantism still exists in modern insects. They simply can't express these traits in today's atmosphere. The same physical principles that enabled giants in the past still operate today, just under different atmospheric conditions. But the story becomes even more intriguing when we consider atmospheric density. The Carboniferous atmosphere wasn't just oxygen-rich, it was likely denser overall. Computer models suggest that the combination of higher oxygen and different carbon dioxide levels created air that was approximately 20 to 25% denser than what we breathe today. For flying insects, this made an enormous difference. Denser air provides more lift, making flight easier and less energetically expensive. Meganeura, with its massive wingspan, wasn't just able to breathe in the carboniferous atmosphere, it could fly more efficiently than would be possible today, even if modern oxygen levels could support its size. This density effect extended beyond insects. Early amphibians and reptiles would have found the dense, oxygen-rich air much easier to breathe through their primitive lungs. It may have been a crucial factor that allowed vertebrates to make the challenging transition from water to land. The carboniferous atmosphere had another distinctive characteristic that's difficult to imagine today. It was prone to spectacular, unstoppable fires. While modern forests can burn under dry conditions, carboniferous forests could ignite and burn even when soaking wet. Laboratory experiments have shown that at 35% oxygen, even damp vegetation can sustain combustion. These fires may have actually helped prevent oxygen from climbing even higher. As oxygen increased, fire frequency increased, creating a negative feedback loop. More oxygen led to more fires, which consumed plant matter that would otherwise have been buried, returning carbon to the atmosphere and preventing further oxygen accumulation. Some scientists believe this fire feedback mechanism capped oxygen at around 35%. Evidence for these ancient fires comes from charcoal deposits found in carboniferous sediments. These charcoal layers suggest regular intense burning events that would have been impossible in today's atmosphere. It's another aspect of that alien world that challenges our imagination. The effects of hyperoxic conditions extended far beyond just enabling giant arthropods. The entire ecosystem was transformed by atmospheric chemistry in ways that influenced evolutionary trajectories for hundreds of millions of years. Consider the plants themselves. High oxygen levels allowed them to grow faster and taller than would otherwise be possible. Carboniferous lycopods could reach maturity in just 10 to 15 years, astonishingly fast for 100-foot-tall plants. Modern redwoods, by comparison, take several centuries to reach full height. This rapid growth was possible because high oxygen concentrations enhanced photosynthetic efficiency, allowing plants to produce more energy with less effort. These ancient forests were also structurally different from modern ones. Without efficient decomposers, Carboniferous plants didn't need to invest heavily in defensive compounds that deter herbivores and fungi. Their tissues contained fewer tannins, resins, and other protective chemicals that make modern wood resistant to decay. This may have made them more vulnerable to the insects that fed on them, driving evolutionary arms races that contributed to new feeding strategies. The high oxygen environment affected reproduction as well. Many carboniferous plants reproduced via spores rather than seeds, a more primitive method that requires water for fertilization. The humid, swampy conditions were perfect for this strategy, but as climates dried toward the end of the period, plants with seeds, which could be fertilized without standing water, gained evolutionary advantages. For amphibians, the oxygen-rich air presented both opportunities and challenges. Early species grew to impressive sizes, with some reaching lengths of 15 feet or more. Their primitive lungs worked more efficiently in high oxygen conditions, allowing them to venture farther from water than would otherwise be possible. But amphibians had a critical weakness. Their eggs had to be laid in water to prevent drying out. As the carboniferous climate shifted and swampy habitats became less common, this limitation became increasingly problematic. The solution came from an unexpected source. Around 320 million years ago, the first true reptiles evolved their key innovation. The amniotic egg, with its protective shell and internal membranes that kept embryos moist. This was a biological breakthrough that freed vertebrates from dependence on standing water for reproduction. Early reptiles were small, perhaps 12 to 20 inches long, but they had crucial advantages over their amphibian contemporaries. They could lay eggs on relatively dry land. Combined with scaly skin that prevented water loss, this allowed reptiles to thrive in the increasingly arid conditions of the late Carboniferous. As oxygen levels fell, advantages shifted toward organisms with more efficient respiratory systems. Reptiles, with their improved lungs and circulatory systems, were perfectly positioned to inherit a world that was becoming hostile to giant arthropods. The transition from the Carboniferous to the Permian period around 299 million years ago marked the end of the giant insect era and the beginning of the age of reptiles. Oxygen levels continued dropping, reaching perhaps 15% during parts of the Permian, significantly lower than today's 21%. These changing atmospheric conditions drove one of the most significant transitions in Earth's history. From a world dominated by amphibians and giant arthropods to one increasingly controlled by reptiles. The descendants of those early reptiles would eventually give rise to dinosaurs, marine reptiles, flying reptiles, and eventually birds and mammals. We are, in a very literal sense, children of that atmospheric transition. Our evolutionary lineage traces back through early mammals to the reptiles that survived the end of the oxygen-rich world. The falling oxygen levels that doomed the giant insects created the conditions that would eventually lead to us. This perspective helps us understand current atmospheric changes in a broader context. Today, we're causing atmospheric change of a different kind. primarily through greenhouse gas emissions rather than oxygen depletion. But the principle remains the same. When atmospheric chemistry shifts significantly, life must adapt or face extinction. The rate of current change is unprecedented in geological history, occurring over decades rather than millions of years. This creates challenges that even the most adaptable organisms struggle to meet. The lesson from the Carboniferous is clear. Atmospheric change drives biological change, often in ways that are difficult to predict and impossible to reverse. But there is also hope in the Carboniferous story. It shows that life is remarkably resilient and creative. When conditions changed, organisms found new ways to survive and thrive. Insects may have lost their ability to grow to giant sizes, but they became arguably more successful, diversifying into over 1 million described species and colonizing virtually every terrestrial habitat on the planet. The end of the Carboniferous oxygen peak didn't spell doom for life. It simply changed which organisms would dominate. As we face our own period of rapid environmental change, this perspective offers both caution and optimism. Change is inevitable, but so is adaptation. The giants of the Carboniferous were never meant to last forever. They were products of a specific atmospheric moment, beneficiaries of a brief window when conditions allowed them to reach sizes that seem impossible today. When that window closed, they didn't disappear entirely. They adapted, survived, and continued to thrive in new forms. Their story reminds us that success in evolution isn't about permanence. It's about finding opportunities in changing conditions and making the most of them while they last. The Carboniferous giants did exactly that, dominating their world for 60 million years before atmospheric chemistry moved on to something different. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine that ancient world one more time. The dense, oxygen-rich air, the towering forests of primitive plants, the shadows of enormous insects moving through filtered sunlight. It was a world so different from ours that it might as well have been an alien planet. Yet, it was our planet, Earth in one of its many incarnations, showing us just how thoroughly conditions can change over geological time. The Carboniferous reminds us that our current world isn't permanent either. It's just one chapter in an ongoing story of atmospheric evolution, biological adaptation, and planetary transformation. The air you're breathing as you listen to this contains echoes of that ancient atmosphere. Every oxygen molecule was once part of that hyperoxic world, cycling through countless organisms over hundreds of millions of years. The carbon in your body may have once been part of those giant lycopod forests, buried as coal, then released back to the atmosphere to become part of you. We are connected to that alien world in ways both profound and intimate. The Carboniferous isn't just ancient history. It's part of us, written into the chemistry of our planet and the genetic memory of life itself. The legacy of that oxygen-rich world extends far beyond just the fossils we dig up today. It shaped the very foundation of modern atmospheric science and our understanding of how planets can support life. When researchers study the atmospheres of distant worlds, searching for signs of life beyond Earth, they're looking for the same kinds of chemical signatures that the Carboniferous period created here. Free oxygen is what scientists call a biosignature. It's highly reactive and would quickly disappear from an atmosphere unless something was constantly producing it. On Earth, that something is photosynthesis. Finding oxygen in the atmosphere of another planet would be strong evidence that life exists there, actively transforming its world just as those ancient forests transformed ours. But the oxygen story also reveals something crucial about our own biology. Humans, like all mammals, are products of an oxygen-dependent evolutionary lineage. Our high metabolic rates and energy-hungry brains require constant, efficient oxygen delivery. This is why we've evolved such sophisticated respiratory and circulatory systems. Lungs with millions of tiny air sacs to maximize gas exchange. Hemoglobin-rich blood to transport oxygen throughout our bodies. These adaptations reflect our evolutionary history in a world where oxygen was abundant, but not excessive. Unlike insects with their passive breathing systems, vertebrates developed active pumping mechanisms that could scale up as animals grew larger. This allowed us to maintain high metabolic rates even as atmospheric oxygen fluctuated over geological time. Our dependence on this gas is so complete that even small changes have profound effects. Climb to high altitude, where oxygen pressure is lower, and you'll quickly feel the difference. Shortness of breath, fatigue, potentially serious conditions like altitude sickness. Your body will adapt by producing more red blood cells to capture what oxygen is available, but it takes time. At the other extreme, exposure to higher than normal oxygen concentrations is used medically to treat certain conditions. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy delivers extra oxygen directly to tissues that need it, bypassing normal transport systems. But too much oxygen can be harmful as well. Our cells have evolved to function within a narrow range of concentrations. Like a carefully calibrated engine, we need conditions to be just right. This biological balancing act reflects the long history of oxygen on our planet. Our physiology is adapted to current atmospheric conditions, not the extremes of the deep past. If you were somehow transported back to the Carboniferous with its 35% oxygen, you'd likely experience something like oxygen intoxication. Your thinking would become impaired, your coordination would suffer, and eventually you might experience seizures. Evolution hasn't prepared us for such conditions because they haven't existed for hundreds of millions of years. Conversely, if oxygen levels fell significantly, we'd feel constantly out of breath, struggling with the thinner air. Our current biology is calibrated to the world we've inherited, not the worlds that came before. This raises fascinating questions about human adaptability in space exploration. As we contemplate establishing permanent settlements on other worlds, we'll need to create artificially maintained environments with Earth-like atmospheric compositions. Mars, for example, has an atmosphere less than 1% the pressure of Earth's, containing only trace amounts of oxygen. Even more intriguing are proposals to terraform other planets, transforming their atmospheres to make them more Earth-like. Such projects would need to consider not just temperature and pressure, but the specific gas mixtures that human physiology requires. We are, in a very real sense, creatures of our atmosphere. shaped by its particular chemistry over millions of years of evolution. The Carboniferous teaches us that when atmospheres change, life must adapt or perish. Today, we're causing atmospheric change of a different kind, primarily through greenhouse gas emissions rather than oxygen fluctuations. The rate of this change is unprecedented in geological history, occurring over decades rather than millions of years. Yet there's also hope in the ancient story. The insects and arthropods that once grew to enormous sizes didn't disappear when oxygen levels fell. They adapted, evolved more efficient systems, and diversified into countless new ecological niches. Today, insects are among the most successful animals on Earth, with over 1 million described species and many more yet to be discovered. They may be smaller than their Carboniferous ancestors, but they're arguably more successful. They've colonized virtually every terrestrial habitat, from deserts to rainforests, from mountain peaks to urban environments. This adaptability is a hallmark of life on our planet. When conditions change, organisms find ways to continue, though often in new forms. The scientific investigation of Carboniferous oxygen levels continues today, with technologies that would have seemed like magic to earlier generations of researchers. One of the most exciting frontiers involves studying amber, fossilized tree resin that sometimes contains tiny bubbles of ancient air. By analyzing these microscopic time capsules using advanced mass spectrometry, scientists can directly measure the gas composition of prehistoric atmospheres. Another innovative approach examines the microscopic structure of plant fossils. The density of stomata, those tiny pores on leaf surfaces through which plants exchange gases, is inversely related to carbon dioxide concentration. When atmospheric carbon dioxide is abundant, plants need fewer stomata. When it's scarce, they develop more. By counting stomatal density in fossil leaves, researchers can estimate ancient carbon dioxide levels, which helps constrain oxygen estimates. Advanced imaging techniques are revolutionizing our understanding of how ancient arthropods breathed. CT scanning and synchrotron imaging allow scientists to visualize the internal anatomy of both fossil and modern insects in unprecedented detail. These studies reveal that insects can actively control the diameter of their breathing tubes, expanding them during periods of high oxygen demand, like flight. This suggests that even Carboniferous giants had some ability to regulate their respiratory systems, though they remain fundamentally constrained by passive diffusion. Computer modeling has become another powerful tool, creating detailed simulations of insect-breathing systems that can test hypotheses about how size relates to oxygen requirements. These models suggest that in today's atmosphere, the theoretical maximum size for a flying insect isn't much larger than existing species. But in a 35% oxygen atmosphere, size limits increase dramatically, perfectly matching the fossil evidence from the Carboniferous. The implications extend beyond understanding Earth's past. As we explore other worlds, questions about how atmospheric composition affects life evolution become increasingly relevant. If life evolved on ancient Mars, how might it have been shaped by that planet's particular atmospheric chemistry? What kinds of breathing systems might evolve on worlds with different gas mixtures than Earth's? These aren't just academic questions. They inform our search for life signatures on other planets. By understanding how life and atmosphere interact on Earth, we develop better models for what to look for elsewhere. The Carboniferous oxygen peak also offers insights into potential futures for our own planet. While we'll never again see 35% oxygen due to lignin-degrading organisms, human activities are causing other significant changes to atmospheric chemistry. Carbon dioxide levels have risen from about 280 parts per million before the Industrial Revolution to over 420 parts per million today, representing a rate of change unprecedented in geological history. Just as the shift from high to low oxygen drove major evolutionary changes at the end of the Carboniferous, today's atmospheric changes will likely drive biological adaptations. Some organisms will thrive in new conditions, while others struggle. The specific winners and losers are difficult to predict, but Earth's atmospheric history suggests significant change is inevitable. This perspective helps place current environmental concerns in broader context. Our planet and its biosphere have experienced dramatic changes before. Life as a whole has proven remarkably resilient, but individual species and ecosystems can change dramatically when atmospheric chemistry shifts beyond certain thresholds. So the next time you see a dragonfly hovering over a pond or watch a millipede curl up in your garden, remember that you're looking at the descendants of giants. They carry within their DNA the memory of a time when Earth's very air was different, when breathing was easier, when growing large wasn't just possible, but inevitable. The Carboniferous reminds us that our world is just one chapter in an ongoing story of transformation, where even something as basic as the air we breathe